Hey guys, welcome back. So today we're going to talk about attachment styles, and we're going to start with the anxious attacher and just a few things to remember in terms of finding out your attachment style. We find out our attachment style under stress. So when you have a trigger or a threat, or you're perceiving relational conflict, that stress will invoke a response either to merge to other people and cling, or to avoid and shut down. And then there's the disorganized attachment, which is a little bit of both. So when you're trying to figure out your style of relating, notice where you run when there is relational stress. So with the anxious attacher, we're going to go through ways this may have been developed and then what it looks like in adulthood now. And when I'm going through potential things that happen in childhood with the caregiver, this is not a black and white formula. This could have been just different scenarios with your caregiver that nurtured an anxious attachment style. So to start us off, we're going to identify how the dynamic was between you and the caregiver. So when you're looking at attachment styles, also just consider the nature part of it as well, because if you compare you and your siblings, you could have noticed that you responded in an anxious attachment way, but then your sibling responded in an avoidant way. And a lot of that is just your natural temperament. Okay, so to just go through some scenarios and aspects of how anxious attachment was developed, this could have been a caregiver who was inconsistent, anxious, intrusive, or a helicopter type parent. And they could have invoked this codependent dynamic with one of the children. This could have been the caregiver over relying on the child for their emotional needs. So we're just going to use the mother as an example. She is stressed, she's anxious, and this child strongly absorbs her nervous system. And the child might start hyper attuning to the mother to help regulate her. But the reason why the child is doing that subconsciously is to regulate themselves. So they're becoming hyper attuned to where the mom is at. And this is called brain mapping, where the child is just noticing her mood shifts, where she's at, if she needs help. And the child might find ways to initiate helping mom regulate their emotions, maybe through, saying it's okay, mom, or making jokes. There's a lot of different ways kids try to help soothe their parents. And I will say that is a normal thing for a child. The part where it gets dysfunctional is if the mother starts relying on the child for that role. So notice the pattern. If the pattern was mom positively reinforced the child to do that, to be the emotional caregiver, then the child feels responsible. And it could even be not only a responsibility, but that's the only way that I'm getting positive reinforcement and love, is by being the emotional caregiver for the mother. So in this codependent dynamic, the child could also feel a sense of guilt watching the caregiver suffer, watching them in pain. And that is too excruciating for the child to bear. So they will find every way to bring the caregiver back to a form of regulation. So when you're looking at that pattern where the child is building this anxious attachment, it's often the child people pleasing, or they cannot stand being such an empath and absorbing their environment. So they will choose attachment over their sense of self, because if they're in an attachment dynamic, or if they're in that connective dynamic, that feels safer than being themselves, than being alone. And they are very anxious when they're alone, so they might act out or find every possible way to get back into attachment with the caregiver. Another thing is that because guilt plays such a high role in this, the child could feel guilty for not fulfilling that role. And that could have been the caregiver also guilt tripping them when they didn't choose to comfort the caregiver. And, some caregivers are very manipulative. And then sometimes it's unintentional comments, or, the caregiver did not mean to manipulate or guilt trip the child. But when you think of the codependency that's so embedded in your body, you can know logically that something's not your fault. But if the pattern kept working, like, oh, I comforted mom and then she feels better, those times where you chose not to do it can bring such a sense of guilt, because now I have to watch mom suffer and I have to watch mom in pain, and that feels terrifying. It feels like your safety is being pulled away. So the way to get safety back, or to regulate your own chaos, is to go back to being the emotional regulator for the parent. Now we look at what anxious attachers look like in adulthood. And not only do they have high anxiety, but they have difficulty regulating their emotion without someone else, to the point of dealing with strong self-doubt without someone else telling them, what's right or wrong, what they think they should do. So when you overly rely on other people to regulate your own emotions, you stop trusting your own gut. The second thing is that they long for relational certainty. They want to know that they are secure in their relationship. So when you think of a romantic relationship, they're constantly anticipating relational stress or relational abandonment. And so they will look for affirmation, do constant check-ins with their partner to make sure that the relationship is secure. And although this can be a normal thing in a relationship, they're doing it so much that they actually create the conflict, because they're doubting the foundation of their relationship to the point where their partner isn't even able to keep up with giving them that assurance. The third thing that they struggle with is having a sense of self. Remember, the child was constantly attuned to the caregiver, which created a natural disconnection of their own heart. So now they struggle understanding their own internal world because they're so hyper attuned to other people around them. Such a great strength, but taken to an extreme, you don't even know what you're feeling anymore. You don't even know where you stand with things anymore, because it's constantly dependent on the other person. This also means that they suppress their own needs and desires, because they fear that if they are truthful or honest about their needs and desires, that might create abandonment. Looking back in childhood, you often hear the child expressing an opinion or not wanting to fulfill the role that the parent was nurturing, and the parent maybe got upset or gave the silent treatment, or conflict was created. So the child learned, oh, having my own opinion, expressing what I want and what I need actually feels unsafe, and I experience someone withdrawing from me if I do that. So instead, I will suppress what I want, I will suppress what I desire, or aspects of who I am, in order to get attachment back. And you see this playing out in adulthood as well. The next one is they tend to overshare with their communication or edit what they're saying, because they long to be understood, they long to be seen and known. So Although they can be good communicators when they pursue health, the part where this works against them is because their self-doubt is, again, trying to analyze how everyone else is reading them. They start to ramble or over communicate in order to be understood. But the way that this is a self-fulfilling prophecy of their worst fear is often when we over explain, we actually don't receive much understanding because now we don't even know what we're talking about. So they struggle to know what to say and what not to say. So they will veer towards oversharing. The last one that I'm going to talk about is they long for resolution after conflict because of their fear of abandonment. They want, again, the certainty and connection. And when there's conflict, they want to talk about it now. They don't want to talk about it later, because when there's relational threat, waiting to talk about something later or waiting, the next day to resolve something, they don't know how to regulate themselves in that moment. So because relational connection is their form of regulating their own chaos, they will go towards instant resolution. The problem with this is that a lot of times they think they're ready to talk about it, but because they are in high anxiety, it actually does not help them in their communication skills. Because remember, when we are in high anxiety, we go more black and white, and we struggle to be curious and rational and objective. So because of their deep fear of abandonment, they want to resolve things right away. In conflict, they also over apologize because they correlate apologizing with creating a remedy to the conflict. Yet when you over apologize as an anxious attacher, your words lose meaning often, and it becomes a reactive apology versus an authentic apology. So my desire for this video and for my videos are to create self-awareness. Sometimes when we hear verbiage and explanation about certain concepts, it helps us feel seen, understood, and I've had people say hearing about attachment style actually made me feel less crazy because there's actually definitions to it. There's reasons why we do what we do, and understanding your family of origin and the style of relating that worked then, you wonder why it's not working now. And because you're not a child anymore, as kids, we're finding the safest way to get our attachment needs met. But as adults, if we are trying to do it in the same way, it can actually create our worst fear, which is disconnection or abandonment. So I hope this was helpful. In our next video, we're going to talk about avoidant attachment style, and we will explore ways to pursue security. I don't believe that healing means that we get rid of these insecure attachment wounding, but we actually pursue more security so that our attachment wounding fades. And so I hope this was helpful, and I'll see y'all in the next video.